everybody tuning in. I am 𝐉𝐎𝐈𝐍, founder of Jolt Your Career, and if you typically watch my live streams, then you already know what to do. Go ahead and drop a comment on where you're tuning in from, or if you're catching this on replay, drop that hashtag replay. Would love to know where you're tuning in from, what your challenges are, and of course, if you have any questions, drop a question in all caps if you can, so we can make sure we clearly sit off to the right. Because if you have not met Jeff yet, you have not had the pleasure of knowing that it's just really easy to talk to him and keep going. So if you put it all up in all caps, question with your question after it, it'll kind of stand out from all the other good mornings types of comments, so we can make sure we're addressing your conversation. So, or your question, I should say. So today we are talking about recruiters, and who better to bring on than an owner, well, I should say a former owner of a headhunting firm. So without further ado, let me bring on Jeff Rothman. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. You know, when you did that introduction, my volume wasn't up very high, and I thought you said an older recruiter, not an owner.
22 years of an agency owner, and now helping job seekers, on the coaching side. I don't think I would use the word older, but I mean, you got some experience under your belt that we can all benefit from.
And I've got Jeff, the gray hair to prove it. Yeah.
I love it. So go ahead and tell me, we've got multiple people in the comments this morning tuning in. So Hassan, welcome. Donna, Erica, who's just right up the road from me, good morning. We've got Ty. And so already have some questions coming in. So let's dig right on in. But Jeff, before we do, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, because nobody can introduce themselves better than they can.
Thank you. Like you said, I was an agency recruiter, a third-party recruiter, if you will. I had my own search firm for 22 years, and I was in the recruiting industry for a total of 30, which dates me. But I got into coaching a couple of years ago, which was a really great natural transition for me, because you actually do a lot of coaching as a recruiter. What I like to say about myself is that I combine the power of coaching with the real world frontline experience of a former headhunter. And I think that enables me to give my clients an edge when they're out looking for a job, because I have that real world experience of what goes on sort of behind the curtain on the employer side.
Yeah, such a juicy topic, because that's what everybody's asking for. They want to know behind the scenes, what the F, Jeff? Like, what is the deal? So we've got a couple of things. I mean, we're going to get to all your questions, but I want to lay down a strong foundation, because not everybody understands the nuances between different types of recruiters. And so for those of you who know me, my husband is a corporate recruiter. He's an executive recruiter. And so corporate recruiters are recruiters who work for the company. They represent their company. They're filling roles within their organization. Now, there's nuances between different corporate recruiters. There's executive recruiters. There's college recruiters who do bachelor's, master's, all the way to PhD level recruitment. There's technical recruiters. There's so many different types of recruiters that sit inside. You really want to know who you're talking to. And then, so Jeff, why don't you go ahead and tackle contingent versus retained?
Sure. Very briefly, contingency recruiters are the biggest difference is that contingency recruiters are only paid when they make a placement. So they are driven by, and they typically have very low base compensation and very heavy incentive compensation. So they are driven by making placements as quickly as possible. Retained recruiters work on more of a project basis. They get paid regardless of whether they make a placement or not. It's a more professional way of recruiting, although there are lots of very professional contingency recruiters, but the retained recruiters have more resources behind them typically, because there's more certainty around the income that the search firm will have.
Awesome. And then we
So,
also have staffing and headhunters. So I previously was a staffing recruiter. I worked for Aerotech. I was in aviation, but I could still fill engineering roles, scientific roles, skilled trade roles. I could fill all of them, but my niche specifically was aviation. So from forklift drivers to CFOs, or I had so many different roles. One day I'd be working on a pilot, the next day I'd be looking for a super niche mechanic who could work on some type of spaceship part. And
wow.
so there's a lot of different kinds of staffing recruiters or agency recruiters. So you dive in, since you were a headhunter. Tell me what it means to be, as a staffing agency recruiter, I had a base salary, and then I also got commission for how many roles I filled. So for me, as an agency recruiter, staffing agency recruiter, it was all about, you want to get people in quickly. And I had permanent roles, temp to permanent roles, and just temporary roles. It was a wide variety of clients and types of roles I was filling. So Jeff, you take on headhunters, since that's what you were. Explain, what is that? How do they get paid? What are they motivated by?
Headhunters are, well, there's a lot of variation. First of all, headhunters, some of them will work a local market, some of them will have a regional or national practice. So you have to know what their focus is. Also, a lot of recruiters, I would say most of them, have some kind of specialty. So when I was recruiting, I focused on the marketing services industry, and I did it nationally.
Okay.
If you are looking for work in a particular specialty area, I would recommend that you look for a recruiter who has that specialty.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. And be aware that each recruiter can only handle so many clients. So to cover your bases, if you're interested in working with a headhunter, you should have multiple contacts.
Yes.
Be aware also that headhunters do not typically work with people who are coming right out of college. I used to get a lot of calls from folks who were just graduating.
Yep.
Companies pay recruiters for experienced talent that fit a certain set of requirements. So don't be discouraged if you call somebody, you think you're a fit for what they've described, but they say, no, you're not quite right. Like I said, they only get paid when they match up with what the employer is really looking for. And the recruiters that have that industry specialty will have the kind of insight that the employer is looking for, to know that candidates are being well vetted before they're presented to the employer.
Yes, that's such a great point, because so often as career coaches, we tell people, yeah, apply to positions you're qualified for, but go after the positions you want. You can get a bump up. You can go from a mid-level to a senior level role by leveraging some of the stretch assignments you did and things of that nature. But something that's important to keep in mind when you're working with different kinds of recruiters, headhunters, whatever you want to call them, is that depending on where they work is what their client would be open to. So the client is the hiring manager, the company, and the candidate is the job seeker. And so if you are a candidate who's looking to be stretched into the next role, maybe you don't, it's you don't check all the boxes. There are certain recruiters who would be open to working with you because they see your potential. And there's other recruiters that are like, no, my client will only take this purple squirrel that they're looking for. And if I put anything else in front of them, I could damage my relationship with them. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So that way we can build a little bit more resiliency as a job seeker by understanding, okay, this person I may be a no for that particular role, but maybe for something else I would be a good fit. And so I'm so glad you added that. And it pivots perfectly into my next question. Whose side is a recruiter on?
That is, that's a question that I can best answer by saying it's primarily the employer. It's the employer who's paying the recruiter. But the best recruiters work for, have to build relationships on both sides. When I was recruiting, I had a lot of great relationships with candidates. They trusted me. They knew that I was looking out for them. They knew that I would be straightforward with them. I would be as transparent as I could be. And I think that's what people should look for when they're selecting recruiters that they want to build a longer-term relationship with.
I totally agree. As a recruiter, I had to meet the needs of my client, but I also wanted the best for my candidate.
That's a great
Oftentimes,
way to say it, Tegan. Thank you.
yes, oftentimes agency recruiters will say, okay, come on in for an interview. And really, it's just a get to know you session on the agency side. Let me see what your drivers are, what your motivations are. And oftentimes in corporate, in-house recruiters or corporate recruiters, when they're looking to fill their pipeline, that means they're doing cold outreach to people who have not already applied to a position. They just know that a position is coming up, or they frequently need certain types of people, for like software developers, for example. The FANG companies are always going to need software developers. So those recruiters are always looking to build relationship with software developers. So let's say I'm a tech recruiter for Microsoft, and I know there's some amazing talent at Tesla, at Facebook, at wherever. Well, if I'm reaching out to these people and saying, hey, what are your drivers? What are you looking for next in opportunities? What challenges do you enjoy? Where do you want to be at compensation wise? Really getting to know what your holistic picture is. Bottom line, what is it going to take? What type of opportunity do I need to present to you to be able to get you to come and work for my company? So that way, when that opportunity comes up, I can call you, hey, Jeff, guess what? It's here. You ready? Let's talk about it. And that's part of building the relationships with the recruiters. And so, yes, ultimately, we as recruiters are responsible for meeting the needs of our client, right? That's how we get paid. Everybody's got to eat. But good recruiters care. We truly do care. And so when everybody says, oh, this recruiter ghosted me, or they don't care about, whatever, that might be a bad apple. But the holistic picture of recruiters we're people. We want to see everyone succeed, and we want to set up win-win situations, because the worst feeling in the world is getting invested in a candidate, going through all the motions, feeling like we're doing right by the company, doing right by the candidate, and then the deal fall through at the end, oftentimes because the candidate wasn't transparent enough through the process. Maybe the candidate was interviewing at other places and wasn't transparent about it. Maybe the candidate actually wanted something a little higher, but refused to talk, solid numbers beforehand. And so as a career coach, that's part of the strategy. And I'm sure, Jeff, you do the same thing, is priming our clients so that they can effectively work with recruiters so it can be a win-win situation. And so we can identify the types of recruiters who will be not only on the employer side but also our side, because let's face it, we want our clients to win, right, Jeff?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great point, and it leads to something else that I think is really important. When you are having a conversation with a recruiter, when you're vetting recruiters to know who you want to work with, I would focus more on recruiters uh, who have more experience, who have some stability in their recruiting career, because recruiters who are just starting out aren't going to understand. They won't understand what you just said. They're less likely to. I don't want to say they won't, but they're less likely. They've got to get established. They've got to get moving. They got to prove themselves, and it's a lot harder to build relationships with candidates when you're in that mode.
Yeah.
More experienced recruiters have a greater sensitivity, I think, in general, to building relationships with candidates.
The interpersonal aspect that goes into the job search is something that takes time to build, and I've seen it on both sides. I've seen recruiters be really burnt out, and maybe it's time for them to pivot. And I've also seen really ambitious recruiters, especially on the agency side, or when it is like that contingency where it's really cutthroat, and some less than ethical things will happen. And so that's ultimately why I left, is because I wanted to make sure that I was doing right for the clients, and the amount of discrimination and unethical things, I knew I wasn't going to be able to change it, right? I'm never going to be able to go to a client and say, no, I'm not only going to put men in front of you, because women can be equally amazing at this inventory job. But where me as a business owner, I can hire who I want to hire. I can serve the people I want to serve, and I can leverage my relationships to tell somebody who's making a less than ethical decision to say, that's really shitty, and you might want to reconsider that. Like, just as a human being, we should do better. And me, in the position that I'm in now, I can say that, where before, I kind of rocked the boat a little bit. They respected me for it, but ultimately it weighed too much on me. And so I got out. Where on the flip side, where my husband, he gets to make a difference every day. He gets to serve as a trusted thought leader to his clients. And he's saying, okay, hey, this is what market value is right now. This is what the nature of the market is, because hiring managers don't always know. And so, to your point, good recruiters, experienced recruiters, aren't just box checkers, they're consultants for the candidate and for the client.
Right.
Client, hey, this is where the market's at right now. We really need to look at the compensation. Not only will they speak to the hiring manager about that, they'll speak to the compensation team about that. Comp team, come on, like that, we need to figure out this way. How are we going to move? If this is all we can do in cash, how are we going to structure the sign-on bonus? How are we going to structure the equity? What's going to be the vesting period to those golden handcuffs? And so, like you said, recruiters that have a bit more experience to them are going to be able to navigate these sensitive topics and handle them a little bit better. Where fresh recruiters, new to the industry, it's a lot, and it takes a lot to be able to navigate through it, and not everybody can stomach it. I couldn't. I was like, forget this. I'm going to go and open my own business and do things my way. So, to all of the talented recruiters out there, I appreciate you, because your job is not easy.
Like you were just saying, and I'll put it a little bit different way, new recruiters have to fake it until they make it.
Yep.
You really don't know what you're doing, as in terms of the industry. You don't know the industries you're working in as well as those more experienced folks. So it also I think goes back to something I said earlier, which is looking for recruiters who specialize in an industry, because by knowing that industry, they can have the kind of conversation with hiring managers that you just described.
Yeah, exactly. Um, it it's all about building relationships, and that takes time. So let's go ahead and pivot really quickly, Jeff, into the comment section. So Ty wants to know, why do recruiters ask for the last four of the social?
I have no idea. I've never done that. I don't know any agency recruiter, any headhunter that does that. Uh, the only point in the recruiting process where that might happen is if the client, if my client was going to do or wanted us to do a background check on the candidate, and that's at
Yep.
the very end of the process. So I wouldn't. I mean, I personally would never ask that. That's private information, and unless we really need it for some reason, there's no need for it, in my
Yeah.
view.
When I was an agency recruiter as well, I didn't need the social for anything. I think when it comes to the background check, and that wasn't anything I ever saw. It was like another team that, you submitted all of your information online, and that was at the end during the offer round stages. So Ty, is that what you're talking about? Was it towards the end? So let me go ahead and run through some other people who are tuning in this morning. Lots of great folks in the house. And then we've got another question. So Ty, thanks for coming at us with questions. Why don't recruiters let you know you've been rejected for a job? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do some of them leave them hanging?
Well, that's to me an indication. I mean, I can't speak for other recruiters. I didn't do that. I thought that was just bad form and didn't help you build your practice. Um, to me, it's an indication that yet the recruiter is really just focused on making their next placement and churning through as many candidates as they can to find that one person who the company is going to hire. I mean, part of the problem in contingency recruiting is that a lot of times the recruiter does not have that search on an exclusive basis.
Yep.
So it is a race between them and their competitors to put candidates in front of the client. And that sort of leads to this problem with recruiters not taking the time, because they don't really have it, to get back to all the candidates they're talking to. It's another reason to look for a more experienced recruiter who's working with with clients on a repeat basis, builds a lot of relationships in the industry, knows the industry well, and knows that they need to nurture relationships with their candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brittany was concurring, I think, at this point, that being a recruiter isn't easy. I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to go through. And when you are on the agency side, which is the premise of this conversation, like Jeff just mentioned, multiple companies may be going after the same position. And so there's not always an exclusive right to that rec. And so if I'm looking for 100 software developers, and there's probably 20 other companies looking for 100 software developers as well. And so if I'm reaching out to all these software developers, and the the client decides, okay, well, we're just, they did an amazing job, or the rates they decided, behind the scenes are more advantageous, so I'm only going to go with the candidates that this company found instead of this company. So I may have found some amazing software developers, but the client may choose to go another route. And then it's my responsibility to get back to these 100 software developers and say, hey, I'm sorry, the client, went another route. They didn't really explain much. And sometimes that's all I can offer, because I don't know. Now, agency recruiters, there's a bunch of different ways companies work. Sometimes the recruiter is actually more of like the corporate sourcer, where they're only picking up the phone, cold calling people. Hey, you want a job? Hey, you want a job? Hey, you want a job? Send me your resume, send me your resume, send me your resume. And then it gets moved over to an account manager. And then that account manager, who would be more like the corporate recruiter who deals directly with the client, then would go through the resumes, decide which one they want to present to the client, and then the client ultimately gets to decide which candidates they want to interview. And so some places work differently. That's why when you're working with an agency recruiter or someone who's not like in-house, you can ask more questions. You can say, okay, how does this agency work? What are relationships that you have with your clients? If you're speaking to me about a particular client, what is the typical process that you interact with this client? Because when I was in aviation, I'd have one client who wouldn't even interview, who would just say, Teague, I trust your judgment. Get me this person. Go through the background check, because it's the background check plus the Department of Transportation background check being in aviation, and let's get them in. Let's get them started. And I've had clients who said, whoa, I want to meet the hiring manager before I decide I'm going to take on this role. And as a job seeker, I want you to advocate yourself. So I'd be like, Bill, meet this guy. He's awesome. He just wants to make sure it's a good fit too. You want good people to be working for you. Have the phone call. And then he'd do it. But like you said, not everybody is willing to have those types of relationships. And so you as a job seeker, for who's watching, advocate for yourself and ask tons of questions. If the recruiter says, well, this client doesn't need to interview you, you just interview with me and then you can start, you can say, but I would like to know who I'm working with to make sure it's a good fit for me too. Can we make that happen? If not, I'll go ahead and pass on this opportunity. Or can you tell me more about this? Is there anybody else who works there that I could chat with to learn a little bit more about the culture to make me feel comfortable? And you can do that. You have a lot more power as a job seeker than you think you have. So Brittany's got a question. Maybe, Jeff, you want to tackle this. What are your thoughts on contract roles?
Contract roles. Some recruiters will work both contract and permanent placement. They're really two different types of recruiting, but I'm not sure exactly what you're asking with regard to my thoughts on contract roles. I mean, contract roles are great if you're trying to get into an industry that you don't have a lot of experience in, or a different type of role, or if you just need to fill a gap because you're unemployed. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure exactly what Brittany's asking. So if you want to be a little bit more specific, let's see, what did she say? Contract roles?
Yeah, so she mainly works on contract roles and wanted to gauge just how people feel about them. For me personally, the type of clients that I work with are typically mid to senior level leaders. They're not interested a lot of time in contract roles. They want something that's a little bit more stable. However, I've got a lot of friends in healthcare, for example. And so a lot of my girlfriends are traveling nurses. They love traveling all over the country, going to different hospitals, working on different projects, getting departments up and running, and then going to the next project. And they don't look like job hoppers because they stay with the same firm. So if you can build a relationship with a firm where they consistently bring you work as a 1099 employee, and that fits your lifestyle, fantastic. Typically, contractors are paid a little bit more. Sometimes benefits aren't as great. It depends on the agency that's representing them. The thing that I see, though, is a lot of times people will do contract jobs and not stay consistent with who's representing them. So maybe you're an accountant and you're doing a job for Randstad this year, and then 6 months later, now you're at Aerotech, and then 12 months later for the next contract, you're at this agency. And so it looks really job hoppy, where if you stay with the same agency, if the same agency is consistently getting you work, which a good recruiter will keep you employed. If you're in a high demand occupation, Tegan does an amazing job. She worked for this client and this client, got raving reviews. She's your girl, and will advocate for you because you do so well, compensation wise and things like that. That for certain industries and for certain personality types, contract work is amazing. I've got a lot of engineers, for example, that love contract work because they're so freaking smart that they get bored working on the same project. So yeah, I'll go, to NASA and work on this project, and then I'll go to Tesla and work on this project, and then I'll go and work on this project. And it as a resume writer, it's a fantastic challenge to make that story flow. The thing that I would like everyone to encourage you to think about, and I understand this sentiment is it feel like it's a technique to test people out. Sometimes that's the case. They want to try before they buy. Before they invest in onboarding somebody, which is really, really expensive, they want to make sure it's a good fit. And sometimes companies just outsource their HR or their recruitment division, and they don't have an in-house recruitment team. And this sometimes is the case, but sometimes it's the case of certain industries have like more so projects that need to get worked on, and you don't need that. Like once the software is built, it's built. You may need a couple of people, to continue doing the updates and working bugs out and things like that, but you don't need these big, massive teams. And so based on your personality, you have to determine, does this work for you and does it not work for you? And to Jeff's previous point, vet your recruiter, vet the agency that you're working with. Will you have work for me when this contract is done? Who are your clients? You can ask these things to make sure that the relationship you're going into is fantastic. And this isn't only for short-term roles as well. When it comes to building these relationships and vetting these agencies, executive recruiters are like the ace in the pocket for board executives. I have so many executives who are like, okay, the transformation's over. I got the company back into shape. They're no longer in pain. Everything's running smoothly. Now I'm bored. Get me out of here. I don't want to be a CEO. I wanted to be I want to do something different. And they want to move on to their next challenge. They can pick up the phone to the relationships that they built with those executive recruiters and say, all right, it's been 3 years. Company's running in tip-top shape, fixed everything. Now, where's my next challenge? Tegan, find me my next challenge. I need X, Y, and Z. Matter of fact, I want to move to California. I'm tired of 7 feet of snow out here in Chicago. And you better believe they will find something for you. And so building relationships with your recruiters and valuing the agency that's representing you are just as important as a traditional jobs, as the other way to do your job search when it comes to vetting the company you want to work for. So when you work with an agency, yeah, you got to do a little bit more work to make sure the agency you also want to represent you. But there's so many benefits of working with recruiters. So we've got a question from Jill. Jeff, I know we're going a little bit over the 30 minutes. Do you have a couple extra minutes?
Oh, sure.
Okay. What questions do you feel are key to ask recruiters when deciding as a candidate whether or not to work with that individual? Could that be helpful?
Well, the first one obviously is what do you specialize in? What kind of people do you place? Tell me about some of your recent placements. Okay.
I agree. Yeah.
And there's a difference between what kinds of searches have you worked on versus what searches have you successfully completed.
Yep.
Also, you can ask what for a profile of the kinds of companies they work with. They're not going to give you names, or at least I would never give names until I had vetted the candidate. But try to get a profile of, are they large? Are they small? Where they're located, stuff like that. Are they open to, your clients open to people working remotely? I think those are some of the key ones.
Yeah, if I was going to be working, with an agency, I would do a lot of this prep work in advance. Look and see what positions they've posted in their activity section on LinkedIn. Look at the company website to see what the company website says, and make sure that what that recruiter is telling me is in line with the research I already found. Because you can identify red flags if there's any misalignment with, are you selling me too much? Are you telling me just what I want to hear? Or are you legitimately having a transparent conversation with me?
Yeah,
So,
and one thing you talked about looking at their website, and I just want to jump in on this because a lot of search firms will create a very broad picture of the kinds of searches they work on, but in reality, it's unfortunately going to be a lot narrower than that, I think, in most cases. So that's why you want to ask that specific recruiter what they work on.
yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I know that this is a really broad question, but in terms of best practices for working with a recruiter, I am going to say that I think best practice is really being transparent with what your needs are. For an in-house recruiter, if they ask you what your salary range is, or what your compensation expectations are, I typically like to say, well, what is the salary range for this position? And then so that way you can kind of gauge it off of that and say, well, obviously with my experience, I'd like to be closer to the top end, but the more I, learn about this position, I can come back to you once I learn more with a solid concrete number. Is that okay with you? However, with an agency recruiter, they may not have one specific role in mind. It's not like you've applied to a position. They're going to be representing you for the types of positions that you're interested in oftentimes. So you need to be transparent with an agency recruiter. Look, Jeff, I got bills to pay. I've got a 4-year-old who, he wants a big house. That's actually what he said last night when I was switching my phone at the Verizon store. The guy was like, "Oh, do you want a phone?" He's like, "No, I want a big house so I can have more toys." Mommy said I can't have another toy because I don't have enough room. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what kids will say. But I digress. You want to be transparent. Jeff, this is where I'm at compensation wise. Let's do easy numbers. I'm at 100 right now. I know I'm significantly under market. I really struggle with negotiating my salary, which is why I'm so undervalued right now. If I would have negotiated, I would have been where my peers are at, which is, 140. And so in my next role, I would like to be compensated accordingly to market value and what my experience is. You can kind of get a little bit more vulnerable with a headhunter, an agency recruiter. Look, I really like this aspect of my job, but I really don't like this aspect of my job. So if you could find me a role where I was doing more of this and less of that, I would be willing to leave my company and explore another opportunity. Um, and so I think for best practices with working with an agency recruiter or a headhunter recruiter, you still want to be professional about it. But I think that you can have a bit more transparency because you're not applying to a particular position. You're being open to being represented within your industry. So, Jeff, I mean, we could open a whole can of worms with what I just
That's
said there.
that's a whole nother LinkedIn live for us.
But what would you
But
say is best practice for working with recruiters?
let me just say one thing about that quickly. And this is advice that has been the same for years and years. I'm sure you talk with your clients about it when you're working on their resumes and LinkedIn profiles. Be prepared to very clearly and concisely be able to state your value in as quantitative terms as possible. And you need to be able to have that very quick. You need to have that in a very quick elevator speech. So when you get on the phone, you can hook them. You get their attention right away. And you
Love
need to
that.
be able not just put that on your resume, but be able to tell those stories in a compelling way. And
Yep. I love that. There's so many different acronyms to do this. There's the STAR method, the CAR method, the SOAR method. But bottom line is you want to be able to have your resume be a cheat sheet for your interview. You want all of the major, this is how I brought value to my organization on that resume. So when you're verbally articulating yourself, you can use it as a cheat sheet. When you're behind that phone call, you got your resume here and you're saying, I was able to accomplish this and this and this. That's not enough though. You need to tell a story so it resonates with the recruiter, like Jeff hinted to with how he just explained it all. So what's the situation? Were there any obstacles you faced? Maybe you were in a turnaround situation. Maybe there wasn't an obstacle. Maybe you just got into a position, somebody was promoted, the company was in good shape. But then what action did you take during that role? Did you implement any processes or procedures? What projects did you work on? And then tie it up with a pretty red bow. What were the results? And the results are key here. As a staffing agency recruiter, a headhunter, like we said in the beginning of this live, if you didn't catch the beginning of it, go back and check the beginning on replay, because we are being hired to find a very niche person or a very specific qualifications, because there's multiple agencies fighting to get someone in this role unless they're on an exclusive basis. So you want to make sure that you are emphasizing the results you give. So that way, she was able to save the company money. She was able to meet these deadlines. She was able to, do this and this and that. And so it definitely helps when you just take Jeff's advice of concisely articulating your value, whatever that secret sauce is, and backing it up with things that are I call them rev points. Make them relevant, extraordinary, and verifiable. So relevant to the position that you're targeting, extraordinary, something that not everybody else has done. You may go to work the same day and feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again, but if you're good at what you do, you may feel like it's easy, but it's probably above and beyond what other people are doing. And then the V, verifiable, back it up with metrics, back it up with, my manager has always recognized me for this, or making sure that it could be verifiable when it comes to looking up that you truly do have this certification, or that you do have this education level, or whatever it may be, is a game changer when it comes to working with agency recruiters and headhunters. So Paula says, great discussion. Christina says, this has been insightful. So it looks like we've helped a couple people out this morning, which means we'll definitely have to come back again, because this was not enough time.
Hey, let me add one really quick thing, because I know we have to jump off. You were talking about those case studies, those, I used to call them mini stories.
Yeah.
When my candidates were interviewing with companies, I would always recommend, when they were interviewing for a specific job, I would always recommend that they create a library for themselves in outline form of those stories, so that when they're in the interview, whether it's video or in person, they have those notes right in front of them.
Yep.
And to make those stories relevant, key competencies that you can just, when you're in an interview and things are, you're trying to make sure you say all the right things, you're thinking ahead. I mean, there's so much tension that goes on in an interview. Having that laid out in front of you can be really helpful.
Winging it is never a good idea if you want to get the job. Right. Never. Preparation is key onto landing that role, because if you're not willing to take the time to prepare to get the job during courtship, what is that saying as a reflection of you as a professional when you're actually in that role?
Right.
And so I'm not going to hire you, and I don't want to represent you. And so think about it. If you're serious about your job search, you need to put in the work. And once you've done the work, you've got it done. You know these things like the inside of your head. On my coaching call yesterday with my clients, we were going through interview prep, and my one client, she was like, I know how to answer, tell me about myself like I know my son's middle name. It just comes out now. And when you haven't been on the job search in a while, it's hard to remember those things about you. And so if you really want to be a competitive job seeker in this space, you have to nail these questions. They need to be concise. They need to speak to the employer's pain points, and you need to prove you can solve those pain points. And with that, Jeff, close us out. What are your final thoughts? What is your best advice for job seekers in this 2022 job market, whether they are working with an agency, recruiter, headhunter, or not? I don't care. Whatever you want to, however you want to take this question, take it away.
All right. Couple things. First of all, just to go back to what we just talked about, focus on your value, do it in a clear, concise, and compelling way, and to be the most effective when you're interviewing or talking with a recruiter, be authentic. Okay? Be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not, because that'll come through right away.
I love it. Yes. Know yourself, own it. You are uniquely you. That is your secret sauce. Ty, yes, this will be recorded. Vera, you are so welcome. To the 30 other people who are watching this live, feel free to message Jeff if you have any other questions. Here's his LinkedIn URL, Jeff Rothman. It's really easy to find. Go ahead and connect with him. Send him a personalized note. Hey, Jeff, saw you on Tegan's LinkedIn Live. Would love to connect with you, learn a little bit more about one of the topics you were talking about. Follow up with him if you have any questions. He did this for 22 years, will be able to be transparent with you when it comes to what your questions are and help guide you through this job search. You do not have to go at your job search alone. There are too many resources out here to help you navigate the different variables that come up. So go ahead and do it. Brittany, thanks for all you do as a part of constantly posting your recs on the Job Connections Tuesday Collective. Dan Roth, special shout out to you. Happy 1-year anniversary for Job Connections Tuesday. And for everybody else tuning in, you can catch me live every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Central Time. Jeff, definitely going to have to take you up on your offer to come back again. And for everybody else, have a wonderful day.